Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman Podcast.
Customer success is really understanding the journey that the customer is on and the problem that you're solving as a solution, and sort of finding a way to align yourself as a company with getting those customers to achieve that end.
Hello, Sales Nation. I'm Will Barron, host of the Salesman Podcast, the world's most listened to B2B sales show. If you haven't already, make sure to click subscribe. And with that, let's meet today's guest.
Great. Hey there. My name is Peter von Burchard. I'm the VP of Sales at Wistia, and we are a video enablement platform for salespeople and marketers.
On this episode of the show with Pete, we're diving into customer success, what the heck it actually is, why it might be the future of selling, and a whole lot more. So let's jump right in. What is customer success? This is clearly the starting point for the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. I imagine you'd get a different answer if you asked 100 people the question. You know, I think for Wistia and for SaaS businesses that I've seen, you know, customer success is really understanding the journey that the customer is on and the problem that you're solving as a solution, and sort of finding a way to align yourself as a company with getting those customers to achieve that end. And, you know, so for us, we talked about a little bit how we attack that, but I think it's really about kind of aligning the business and the solution with the goals of the customer and helping execute on that.
So, and this is a weird question to ask on a sales podcast, and I'm going to stereotype salespeople a little bit here, but why is it that we're now all of a sudden seemingly focusing on enabling people to achieve the goal versus, I guess, what salespeople have done in the past? If they stop at the implementation phases, we are selling them on the dream of achieving their goal. Why is this separation between the two?
Yeah, I think it has to do with how we charge our customers, I think. You know, Wistia is a SaaS platform. When we close a deal, you know, we are making a promise to that customer that we're going to help them achieve their goals. In exchange, we're going to ask them monthly or annually to rebuy that service, essentially. And so we're signing up for a long-term engagement and effectively a partnership to achieve that dream that we've sold the customer on. And so it has a lot to do with how we make our money in SaaS, I think. But it really does sort of align, you know, the salesperson's goal with the customer's goal, which is probably good for everybody.
Yeah, of course. That makes total sense, right? And I was kind of baiting you there with that question because it's seemingly common sense, the answer. So with that said, it seems that customer, whether it's been called other things and it's only just coming into like my zeitgeist now as I kind of do all these shows and that, or if it's becoming more and more of a topic, it's its own conversation, why or whose responsibility is customer success? For the quota-carrying B2B sales professional who perhaps gets paid at this point in time only on getting the deal signed, why should they care about it, you know, if they should at all?
Yeah, I think it comes down to what, as leaders, you know, what do we ask our salespeople to care about? Often that comes through with basically what's their quota or how they get paid, really, typically how that works. But I think it's, you know, the entire company's responsibility to care about customer success. If the CEO of the company is not focused on it, then mostly everybody else will not be really focused on it. And I think it comes from the top. And for us, Wistia was a product that came from a freemium model. So for 10 years, we didn't have a sales team or a customer success team or an account management team. And every customer that we had, which grew to about 20,000 customers over this period of time, came through the product itself. So we'd help create content, show them how to make videos. Ultimately, they'd need a place to store those videos. They'd get into our free product and they'd upgrade in a self-serve fashion. And as a result, over 10 years, basically the entire company became a customer success team. Everything we did was from the perspective of why are we doing this? Are we adding value to the customer or getting the customer closer to the solution that we're providing? And so we've kind of carried that forward as we've grown and added other teams and sales teams. But that's very much ingrained in the culture of the company right now.
So let's make the assumption then that customer success goes or is handed to the account manager. And perhaps we're not talking SDRs, BDRs here, but perhaps there is people who go out, win new business, and then there's account managers who manage the accounts after the fact. And the reason why I want to discuss this Now is that it might be that some people listening to the show go, I would really like to do that, or I'd really like to do that. And perhaps both of them can be kind of highly commissioned. And so if the commission structure is similar between the two, then we can go down to kind of the traits of the individual that would suit one role and the other. So with that said, Pete, what are the traits of a good account manager, and then what are the traits of the good kind of stereotypical salesperson, so the audience know whether they should be aiming down this route or perhaps aiming down a different route with their careers?
Yeah, one or the other. I think for us, what has worked on the account manager side is I should say there's a lot of overlap, and I think there's also just very key differences between the two roles and how they approach their relationships with their customers. The overlaps, I think, are just really being a inquisitive person, being able to sort of get to the bottom of not just what the customer says the first time, but really being able to get a couple layers deeper than that and understanding really what's the problem, what are they trying to accomplish, and what are the challenges that the customers are experiencing. I think beyond that, though, we think about the account manager role at Wistia as really a quarterback that is sort of has the entire company behind them to help support the customer. And so sometimes that's the customer will have a problem that we can't solve or wants to see a feature that we won't build. And the typical salesperson might go down the road of saying, hey, that's really good. Let's get that on the roadmap. I could see that coming down the pipeline one day. Yeah. I would think it's the account manager's job to really say like, hey, we're not going to do that. And here's why, and that's why this is where we're going. And here's where we think the product's going. We think that aligns with the challenges that you're having. And here's why we have this partnership. But ultimately, we don't want to set, the wrong expectations. And so I think it's, hey, can we get a really good explanation of what we're doing and why? How are we going to solve solutions for you? Getting engineers to connect with the customer, or getting, leveraging the business intelligence teams to sort of get those customers across the finish line. But I think it's being a real partner from the customer's point of view, as opposed to, really selling something or building that vision.
So does customer success have a finish line then? And what I mean by that is, are we aiming towards a specific goal, we hit it, everyone's happy, or is it a constantly moving goal? Because clearly we want to retain these customers for decades. Absolutely. As opposed to kind of months or years.
Yeah, I think the answer is no. And I think for us, again, it's a little bit of a gray area because, we have people at Wistia whose title is customer success and account management. But I think that's really just the very tip of the broader iceberg, which is really that, the whole company is trying to retain those customers. And so they represent, where we're going as a company. And so, for example, our CSMs, our customer success managers, largely focus on product adoption, onboarding. And so you might say, well, okay, once those customers adopt the product and they're using it the way we want them to use it initially, then they go on to the folks that are still sort of at the starting point of that, and they drive adoption for new customers. Account managers take an ongoing one-to-one relationship with our customers. But even the CSMs are basically leveraging what they learned through onboarding and through adoption, and then circling that back to the product teams, to our business insights teams, to our engineering teams to help drive the product in a direction that really aligns with our customers. And so I think it's the whole company, and the support organization is a big part of this as well. But from a sales perspective, I think, we really, the whole company is sitting at the doorstep of customer success going, hey, what did we learn today? What can we put into the product tomorrow that we learned from our onboarding customers today? And so it's a little bit of a closed loop that kind of feeds itself as we learn from customers. And so I would say no. Again, we're a SaaS business and we want all of our customers to stay on forever. And so we're very much invested in that.
Yeah. And this is what I expected. And this is why I wanted to have this conversation, Pete, because if that's a lot of responsibility, right? And if you're at the forefront of all of this, I don't want to always drum it down to money and commissions, but clearly as that role becomes more established, as basically every single industry on the planet moves towards a software or a service kind of a monthly kind of payment model as opposed to capital outlay, I think these roles are going to become less customer success and more senior product specialist, sales specialist, or whatever it is, and they'll have the team below them of product specialist, of implementation expert, whatever it is, and they'll be managing all of this. So with that said, what can we do? And you can use Wistia examples, or we can talk about generic examples here, but other than getting someone onboarded, using the product, and then kind of hitting that baseline of what we expected when we first started the sales conversation and hopefully solving some kind of a problem, what else can customer success or account managers, what can they be doing to add value, even as an individual, to these accounts so that they want to work with, Bob, the account manager, as opposed to Jerry, the account manager, perhaps?
Yeah, two things. This is a great question, and we actively think about this all the time. Of course, all of our approaches are completely fluid and moving all the time. But I think for us, there's two things that really come to mind, and I don't think this is necessarily a Wistia thing. I think this is sort of broadly applicable. One is to become a industry recognized thought leader in the space, because I think ultimately what makes a customer success manager or an account manager ultimately valuable for the customer is if they're really pushing the customer to think about things in different ways, in ways that they're not already thinking about it. Because these roles can very quickly become glorified support roles where, hey, okay, I have your phone number. I can call you. I know you'll pick up the phone. It's your job to talk to me. Therefore, I'm going to call you when the product breaks or I have an issue because I don't want to get into the support queue. And I think that is a very easy thing, and that's essentially what will be the default unless the account managers are teaching the customers about their own business on a daily basis. So I think understanding the business, understanding the use case, being an expert there, I think is the most important thing. And the way to leverage that as a company is through personal branding of those folks. So those folks need to be out on social media talking about the use case, talking about examples that they're adding value. So that's kind of the first way. The second way, I think, is really to be honest with the customers and to sort of be in their camp and not necessarily always be representing the company, the party line, as it were, which is really hard to do. But ultimately, no solution is perfect. No software is perfect. And if you have people out there trying to convince the customer that your product is perfect, every company is going to see right through that. And they're going to get worried that they don't know what they don't know at that point. Yeah. And there's a trust issue there. And so I think really being customer centric is a key thing as well. But I think the way to do it is to be an expert.
So I'm reading this book and it is very dry and it's on account management and the principles within it are really interesting, but it's a dry book, so I won't shout it out on the show. Maybe I'll put it in the show notes. And it's academic, and the point of view of the book is how to get into a large enterprise account with a small deal and work your way up into a big one. This is what I used to do in medical device sales, of going into a hospital, selling to gynecology, urology, whatever it is, and ended up then closing colorectal, outpatient, endoscopy, and everything else, and wrapping up into one larger account later on down the line. So it seems like this customer success approach, from what we're talking about here, Pete, is essentially the model that is dry and boring in this book, but more real with your examples in this place. So is this what we should be doing? Should we be using customer success not just to keep a customer on board, but to say to that customer, well, let's expand, let's talk about this. If I'm an expert in the industry, I can essentially consult with you. I can add value. I can be somewhat impartial from the organization that I work for. Again, these are seemingly all topics that are in this book, but kind of a more vivid picture that's being painted here. Is this what we should be doing with this?
I absolutely think so. I think, and again, it depends on how your product works. If there is an expansion opportunity or a cross-sell, upsell opportunity, then I think it's an obvious way to align, the customer's best interests and the outcomes that they're looking for, and those with, the company that you represent. For us, we have multiple products. We also have ways of sort of expanding the use of the product. So the more videos essentially you have in Wistia, the more eventually you start to pay us. And so, the nice, sort of cause and effect there is you're not going to be adding videos at any rate that matters to the platform unless you're having success with your video strategy. And so, you have to align the two. I think the miss is sometimes where it's just solely based on relationship building, where, hey, I've got I'm an account manager. I have a good relationship. And, in years past, I've taken you to lunch a certain amount of times and we've been to the ball game together, that sort of thing. Because of that, I want an intro to this other person. And that's the account, the typical sort of, and I think sort of somewhat old fashioned account management approach. I think where the customer centricity or the customer success model starts to bleed into this is, instead of basing this solely on relationships, you can start to say, hey, I helped you achieve something that you would not have achieved otherwise. Are there other people in the organization that might benefit from the same thing? And it's helpful when the product is accessible for us. I mean, for us, you can go and create a free account and test it out and see something. I imagine that's a lot easier to spread than medical devices, for example. And so, but I think for us, I think the getting the customer to that sort of to having achieved those goals, I think it becomes a no-brainer for them to sort of spread the word and to grow within the business. And so expansion revenue is ultimately a very lagging indicator of success around this. We don't measure that as a monthly or quarterly cadence, but ultimately that's how we know it's working in the long term.
With all this said, are relationships becoming more or less important in B2B sales? Because it seems like if I'm working with an industry expert, every time I speak to them, their branding's amazing and I enjoy kind of being wrapped up in their world and their environment. Perhaps their brand has a rub off on our organization as well, even if it's small and an internal rub off. But with that all said, if I think they're a bit of an idiot, I'm still probably going to work with them if they've got all that going for them, versus just a standard out-of-the-box sales professional. If they're an idiot, I'm going to go to the competition down the road, right? So with all that said, are relationships becoming less important if you've got all the other stuff going for you?
Yeah, I think what a relationship means is different now, right? So I think ultimately the reason why relationships have mattered in typical sales generations ago, where you have people on the driving, their entire career is in a car, living out of the car, driving coast to coast, trying to sell whatever it is. The whole point of doing that is getting in front of your potential customers and establishing a level of trust with them. And I think nobody really buys anything from anybody unless they have a level of trust established. And you can establish trust these days by basically putting your point of view out there in a very broadly, sort of one-to-many way on social media. And people will consume that content, and you're essentially establishing trust at the same time, because it's like, hey, this guy knows what he's talking about. It helps that, especially on LinkedIn now, which is sort of the business platform, it helps that you can use video so much, because you can really sort of, you feel like you start to know these people. It's like you start to identify in a very visceral way with some of the people that you don't know at all. And there's obvious examples of people doing this very, very well. But I think ultimately it comes down to a very human component, which is, hey, do I trust this guy, or am I taking a risk on something that I don't want to take? And I think the dynamics are changing, and how the scale at which you can do this is changing. But fundamentally, I don't think it's changing. I think it comes down to trust.
So I've mentioned this on the podcast in the past, but I'll use the example again because I think it's a good one. I'll go to sales conferences and there'll be tons of people that listen to the show. Obviously, it's the perfect environment for me to kind of mingle around and for people to try and buy me drinks. So with that said, I meet these individuals, and it's always, I say it every time, and I say it to people's faces when it first happens, because I usually get a weird look on my face as the first 2 or 3 people come over and start shouting my name or trying to shake my hand. It's bizarre for me because I don't know these individuals. They know me because they've had, at this point, thousands of hours worth of content consumed. And there's an element of just impressions, right? Of if you hear this person over and over and over and over, you feel like you know them, whether you do or not. And there's probably people I watch on YouTube or celebrities that I'd be the same way. And so I'll go into this room and I'll be a little bit of a celebrity in the room, then walk out the room and no one gives a shit, no one cares who I am. So I go back to normality straight after that. So with that said, are there any ways other than just impressions? Because I've felt the power of this. I understand it. Is there any ways other than just mass numbers of impressions or even using paid advertising or anything like that, which may be out of the reach of some of the listeners? Are there any other ways to build trust online and build thought leadership that you think have a real good bang for buck for the audience?
Yeah, I think it doesn't have to be. I think that two things come to mind. I think one is very technical. You don't have to have a widely distributed and very well produced podcast to build a personal brand, right? You can focus on just social media. You can find out who are the folks that you are aligned with in terms of your point of view and your company's point of view, and get into a dialogue essentially with those folks and ask questions and respond to their content. I think this sort of this is really sort of inbound marketing and thought leadership marketing at its core, but now it's just a lot easier because you can use video, you can use LinkedIn to do it quite easily. So I think there's a technical component to just start doing it, in my opinion. And the second thing, though, I think, which is related, that I think is very important, is you have to have a point of view. And I think more importantly, I think you have to say what you're not, you have to sort of promote what you're for, but also have a point of view on what you think is not the right approach for whatever it is. Because I think most people want to identify with sort of a dichotomy in thought leadership. They want to understand that there's an alternative that you're sort of saying no to, and that there's something that you're promoting as well. And I think it's important to establish that and be consistent with it. And so I think that those are the two things. But I think it's just start and think, but be a little bit thoughtful on the front end about what you're for and what you're not for.
So we'll make this real for the audience now, in that every piece of, not necessarily a piece of content, but every product or service or even the podcast, the premise of it, everything I do, I try and be polarizing, to a certain extent. I don't want to annoy anyone or piss anyone off, but I don't want to ever play in the gray area in the middle. How does this look, Pete, for, we'll make up a random person of your sales team who doesn't exist called Sally or whoever. How does this look from a sales leadership position when Sally is being polarizing and you're looking at her going, she's getting results, but she might be pissing off half the marketplace by saying all this, and our logo is on the t-shirt that she's wearing as she goes through it? How does this work from your perspective personally as you look down and go, Sally's crushing it. Perhaps she's kind of crossing some of the corporate boundaries on some of this stuff.
Yeah, Wistia is a funny place in terms of corporate boundaries. We try. I think we're sort of part of our business model is to break most of the corporate boundaries that most people are limited by. So that's a little bit funny thing. But I think for us, if it's really just about engaging in a discussion in an authentic way, because anyone can go up there and talk about, well, here's two sides to the story. Either one is okay. But ultimately, this is not where people go necessarily to learn. This is starting to cross the lines between entertainment and education. And it's not entertaining to simply just go and read a bullet point of pros and cons of a point of view. And ultimately, we want to incite conversation. And in my opinion, I'm a big skier. And the way we think about it is if you get off the mountain at the end of the day and you haven't fallen, you probably aren't skiing hard enough. And, I think if you're out there having a point of view on social media and nobody disagrees with you, that you actually don't really have an opinion to begin with. And it's not going to be entertaining for your audience. And so I would say Sally's doing exactly what she ought to be doing in terms of, having an interesting conversation online about it.
Good. Well, that's smart for you, Wistia, and the team there. So I appreciate that. I guess my background is slightly different. In medical device sales, you can't say X, Y, Z because you don't want the company to get sued and the FDA to come in and close everything down, right? But this is an interesting thought, and we'll wrap up with this. And I wasn't planning on talking about it, but if I lean over, get down here. I've literally got a book on my desk, How to Write Comedy, Discovering the Building Blocks of Sketches, Jokes, and Sitcoms, and how to make them work. I'm 4 pages in, so I won't say if it's any good or not. But the entertainment factor of all of this is something that really interests me, because in the sales, training, development, self-development space, it's all boring as heck. And it was one of the reasons why the podcast kind of spawned to life in the first place. I literally Googled podcasts for salespeople, and it was most of it was a dude in a weird, ill-fitting suit on a whiteboard giving you 5 tips of how to like blag someone on the phone, and it was nonsense, and it didn't relate to me at all. So I'm not saying that what I'm doing is any better, but I've tried to go down a slightly different route and have it slightly more chilled and conversational, and hopefully it's a bit more of a laugh for the audience. But that's kind of down to the market for them to decide. But with that said, how do we? And there may not be an answer to this. I don't know. I guess it's a soft skill that is much like selling. But how do we be more entertaining in our content? In a marketplace where perhaps we're competing and our product is somewhat commoditized. Perhaps there's not that much difference. Perhaps people are buying into us as the account managers, customer success. How do we be more entertaining without coming across like a complete clown?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think the word entertaining can be a little bit misleading. And we are a video company. Every single person in this company, is on video. When you become an employee at Wistia, you sign a little piece of paper that says, like, by the way, you're basically giving us, the right to put you on a video, and not that everyone is forced to do that, but you shouldn't come work at Wistia unless you're okay with video, obviously. And so I think the concept of entertaining is a little bit misleading. You're sort of thinking like, man, I wish I was a stand-up comedian, or I wish I was a good actor. But I think ultimately what it comes down to, and I think this comes back to the idea of people buy from people they trust. And I think it comes down to more about authenticity. I think people in a truly visceral way, they want to see themselves in everybody that they talk to. And so I think if you're a super polished salesperson, in suit and tie, and you never miss a beat, and you're crossing your I's and dotting your T's, and you never screw anything up, almost nobody sees themselves in you, right? Everybody screws something up. And I think owning that is really important. I think is entertaining. And I think being out there talking about, hey, we like to talk a lot in from outwardly, publicly about things that we just screw up. It's like we tried something, it was a big bet, we fucked it up, and we learned something from it. But I think that's the kind of thing that people are, that people are drawn to. And I think it sounds like that. And I know that some of this is what, is entertaining and what has worked for a lot of people in social media, which is like, hey, if you're just out there talking about your point of view all the time, and never admitting that, something didn't go right, or, if you're super polished all the time, I think it's just not that interesting to people. But I think if they can see themselves in you because you are imperfect, and, all of us are, I think that's a good place to start.
Amazing stuff. And a final thing on this, I don't expect you to have data on this. There might be data that exists, but is there a cadence for almost all of this of should we be not sending a hi, just checking in email, but sending people a piece of valuable content and then trying to then chat with them on something that they've commented on LinkedIn, and then deepening a relationship by sending them, we screwed up on this, we've learned this might be useful for you, or, a similar tale. Is there a cadence of what a customer success person, a account manager, how often they should be reaching out to customers who haven't said good, bad, indifferent, that we're assuming that they're using the product and everything's plodding along fine? Is there a cadence of we should reach out with these different kind of touch points to make sure that we're giving them an opportunity to say, oh, I'm glad you called because XYZ is being a pain?
Yeah. The answer is yes. I would say that it's probably a little different for every business. But I think whether it's sales or post-sales, account management and CSMs, that it has to be a bit of a all of the above approach. And so I think of it sort of like the email cadence or the phone calls is a little bit of a ground game. The LinkedIn stuff is kind of the air cover for all of it. Because I think what ends up happening is even in LinkedIn, as long as you don't actually ask for something on LinkedIn, if you're asking for the meeting or asking for have a call to action on LinkedIn, then I think it basically merges the two. But LinkedIn is a great way to basically just add value at a very low cost way. and to keep your brand and keep the person, the account manager, front of mind for the customer. The emails and the meetings have to be a little bit responsive to the business, and there has to be a bit of an upfront social contract with the customer there, which is kind of like, hey, like, we're gonna, let's make a plan to get you to where you want to be. Let's agree to that plan, and then we have to hold each other accountable for that. Again, if you're just going to be sort of a piñata to the customer and be reactive, you're going to fall back into that default position of glorified support. But if you're managing the customer such that you can get them to their goals or solve their problems, then you should also be running the cadence by which you're communicating that. And if you're in a bit of a lull, there's no action items, then it should just be about adding value as much as possible and not asking for anything in return. It's kind of like a savings account in that sense.
And what does that plan look like? Is this a formal document of this? Every other week, I will call you. I will tell you, perhaps Wistia, the back end stats. We'll make sure that everything's running. We'll report, and then ad hoc, if there's any downtime or anything, we'll report that to you. Is this a email, a phone call, an official document? What does it look like?
Yeah, I would say it's for us, it's really about getting off the ground and initially establishing what's the goal and like, how are we going to get you to where you want to be? Let's plan the next steps to get there. It's almost like really running a deal, running a customer through a deal, starting with where we want to be at the end of this, and then let's work back from it and get a sort of a joint commitment that we're going to go through that. So for us, very early on, it's pretty much like very intense weekly conversations, and then it probably paces itself out to probably quarterly conversations in sort of a steady state. It's certainly not a written contract, but I would say it's probably best practice to follow up with an email to say, here's what we agreed to, and I expect to, I'm going to hold you accountable to it, essentially. The social media stuff, I think, is a weekly cadence. And I think if you haven't connected on social media with all of your customers as an account manager, then you're missing an opportunity to build your brand with people within the company that you don't know and that don't know you yet, right? So we talked about the expansion opportunities within companies. I'm working with Joe, and I want to get to Sally on the other team. Joe and Sally are likely connected on LinkedIn, and you can kind of navigate all that now. But I think if you're putting content and Joe's responding to it, Sally's going to see it, and it just helps you build that trust with other people.
Sure. And I don't know that there might be a way to measure that, but I think if it's a weekly activity, it's a small enough amount of time to put into it that we don't perhaps need to go over the top and measure it. Because I will go over the top and measure absolutely everything and drive myself crazy with it. But with that said, just get it out. I think there's a lot to just having stuff on the internet, right? Just being findable. I think and this might change over time as more and more people have stuff and content out there. But I feel right now, and tell me your thoughts, and this will be kind of the final thing here, Pete, of how much of a benefit is there just to, when someone searches your name, your LinkedIn profile pops up and perhaps a few articles or something pops up underneath. How much of a difference does that make when we Google the competition and it's just a desert?
Oh, I imagine for somebody who's looking into a competitive product, I imagine it makes all the difference. Again, I think any product that has competition that is going to have, there's features one way or the other. And, some of that stuff is like the feature that the customer is looking for, but that customer is not really up for grabs anyways. And so if you're really looking for, especially in SaaS, where what you're really signing up for is the roadmap. You're not really signing up for the product. You're signing up for a commitment to the problem that you're trying to solve. And so in that sense, it's a real partnership. And so, I think it comes down to, again, I hate to harp on it, but it kind of comes down to this trust factor again. And it's like, hey, I want to understand that this company really represents what they say they represent, not just because the salesperson says so, but because there's a long tail of history here that I can look to see what kind of content is being produced, what's the blog look like, and that the people are authentic and partners.
Got it. And the reason I ask is I genuinely believe now for salespeople, there's a bit of a land grab. There's a potential, LinkedIn 3 years ago was not what it was today. So if you're uploading videos, content to LinkedIn, just that and nothing else, you're going to have more of a mind share than your competition, and that will only grow over time. Well, with that, Pete, I've got one final question, mate, something to ask everyone that comes on the show, and that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling?
I think if I could go back, I think for me, it's just a commitment to learning that I did not have in the early stages of my career. I was a very motivated salesperson. I was focused on how do I get from being sort of an entry-level hunter to a quota-carrying rep to management. And I was very focused on managing my career. And I was not necessarily focused on finding the right mentors, learning what works, what doesn't. And being that sort of establishing what that point of view was. It was sort of the what do I not want to stand for versus what do I want to stand for, and how do I think sales and customer success should be done, rather than just executing and running faster. So I think it's just the commitment to learning and understanding what my point of view was going to be.
And does some of that come down to just time? Because I know, I'm 32 now. 3 or 4 years ago, I was an idiot, and I'm probably look back 3 or 4 years from now and think I'm an idiot at this moment in time. But my big breakthroughs come not from some, God-sent vision or from reading a particular book. It's just from me going, oh, that was stupid. I've been doing that stupidly for too long. And unfortunately, I've never had any miraculous moments. How much of, wanting to go back and learn more or develop your personal brand, all this kind of stuff, comes from just being on the earth for a little bit longer versus kind of a divine inspiration from elsewhere?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's definitely true. But platforms like the one that you're providing here is a big shift in that. I think when I really started my sales career, the only access to points of view that I got was really from my managers. And they frankly loved it that I just didn't ask any questions and worked harder. Yeah. It was trying to beat everybody. It was just sheer competition, essentially, rather than really trying to think about, hey, what's my point of view on this, and how do I think people should do this, and how is this perceived by the customers? And those are questions, and maybe what you're alluding to is a somewhat of a privileged point of view to think about it that way, when you're just trying to figure out, how do I get one foot in front of the other and hit my goals. But I think now you have so much content out there, it's a great place to start, and you can expose yourself to so many different points of view and establish your own pretty early. The other one is mentorship, just having the right managers. And it goes back to, we could spend another 2 hours talking about management and coaching and the impact that has, I think, on salespeople. But I think that is a key to everything. And as I grow my team, I think about who are the coaches on my team and what impact are they having on our early salespeople. So, but yeah, learning is a very important process and cadence to get into early, I think.
Amazing stuff. Well, with that, tell us, we've touched on it and the audience should know at this point all about it, but tell us a little bit more about Wistia and then where we can find out more about you as well, Pete.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, Wistia is a SaaS video platform for marketers and salespeople. We have 2 different products. You can find out more information at wistia.com. And again, my name is Pete. I'm the VP of Sales here. And probably the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. Just search for Pete von Burchard at Wistia and I'll pop up.
Amazing stuff. Well, I'll link to all of that and everything else that we talked about in this episode over at salesman.org in the show notes to this episode. And with that, Pete, I want to thank you for your insights and for showing us and the pathway of potentially even the future of sales as we move towards this SaaS model in all industries. And with that, mate, I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a great day.